Kia ora. This is a recording of a presentation on geothermal heat for residential, commercial and industrial use within the Tauranga geothermal system. My name is Celia Wells and I am from GeoExchange. You'll also be hearing from my director, Yael Carden, and I just wanted to acknowledge and thank Priority One for hosting us to present this in person in Tauranga on the 7th of November. For those that missed it though, we hope you find this recording useful. Well, the purpose of today's presentation is to share the results of a report that GeoExchange wrote and was commissioned by the Bay Plenty Regional Council. This was the GeoHeat Potential of the Tauranga Geothermal System report. However, what we're going to really focus on today is the technological feasibility of using the low temperature resource in the wider Tauranga region and different user applications. What we won't cover in detail is resource consenting. Now, if you're interested in this, there is a lot of information and recommendations written into our report. However, we chose not to present on this matter at this workshop as the Bay Plenty Regional Council were hosting a workshop a week later, specifically on the system management plan for Tauranga, which has been under review and is currently out for consultation. I encourage you to go to the Bay Plenty Regional Council website and have a read of that system management plan and potentially provide feedback in their consultation round that will close on the 31st of January 2025. So I am the Strategic Development Manager at GeoExchange and I've been in this role since the start of this year. I want to give you just a little bit of history about my career as it's relevant to this slide. So previous to this role, I was actually a socio-economic policy specialist in climate and energy at GNS Science and worked really closely with the geothermal team there. Also worked really closely with GeoExchange as they are a partner of GNS's. I was contacted by EECA to query whether geothermal could be included in the Regional Energy Transition Accelerator for the Bay of Plenty. This was the first time that they had considered including geothermal as an energy workstream. GNS was able to do the resource mapping component of the reporting, and then we subcontracted Dobby Exchange to look at a high temperature installation and GeoExchange to look at a number of low temperature installations across particularly the Tauranga region. So I presented those results at the RETA presentation in Rotorua at the end of last year, and in the audience was members or staff from Bay Plenty Regional Council. They could really see the potential that we were highlighting in Tauranga in regards to applications using low temperature geothermal. They saw that as an opportunity to decarbonise the region, and if that was going to be the case, they really needed to understand what implications that had for managing the resource. Therefore, they commissioned GeoExchange to have a bit more of a deep dive into just the Tauranga geothermal system. And that has been a report that I've been working on this year with Yael and others at GeoExchange, and is the focus on what we'll be presenting today. I will also add that a lot of the work I was doing at GNS was speaking with covered crop growers. So fun fact, 90% of tomatoes, capsicums and cucumbers consumed in New Zealand actually come from covered crop facilities. Generally, they use gas for heating, so we can eat those vegetables year round. They've got quite an urgent need to transition away from gas, and they are very interested and have been for a while at understanding whether they can transition to geothermal. So this is a piece of work which is just kicking off now and is funded by Ministry for Primary Industries and co-funded by Vegetables and Tomatoes New Zealand. This piece of work is GNS led, and GeoExchange is partnering on this project as well. So back to the report in question. Now, the focus of that question was, the focus of that report was, could the Western Bay of Plenty use its comparatively shallow, low temperature geothermal resource to its strategic advantage as the region grows? And importantly, how can this be done sustainably? So we're going to hopefully answer these questions in this presentation today. It's a very long report. It's about 80 pages. So if it's too long and didn't read, here's a very quick summary. There is a really good low temperature geothermal resource present in Tauranga. What we found is that most people within the region are not aware of it. And if they are aware of it, the main use that they know of or they think is suitable is for heating pools. So there is a lot of work to be done to sort of begin to change these perspectives. Just to reinforce this point, and this is a graph that you can look at in your own time, but to our point around everybody thinking that the low temperature resource is great for pools, you can see on the uses here, there is a great portion for water and space heating and mineral pool heating. And when it comes to the users as well, again, it's quite pool focused, community facilities, tourism, private use. So I think this is hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll understand that yes, the resource is great for pools, but there are many other applications which can be used for the region's strategic advantage. In New Zealand, we're really fortunate that approximately 18% of our electricity generation comes from geothermal. What's interesting about that is that when you mention geothermal to any New Zealander, their mind instantly goes to the role it plays in electricity generation. I'm going to talk about the term geoheat. So that's different than using geothermal for electricity generation. It's talking about using that geothermal heat directly. So there's two definitions here of this international term, geoheat. There's direct use. That's systems that use the available heat, geoheat, directly. So it might be a geothermal hot pool. So I want to bathe comfortably in 40 degrees. I'm really fortunate that I can extract 50 degrees out of the ground and use it directly. Then there are indirect use systems, which is going to be quite a feature of this presentation. Indirect use is when you require a heat pump to modify the source temperature to whichever temperature you need at the end. So I'm going to direct you to the diagram here, and right in the center you've got two glass houses beside each other. Glass houses need sort of between approximately 70 degrees year round in order to grow vegetables. So the glasshouse on the right there has drilled deeper to access 100 degrees. Now that 100 degrees can be cooled slightly and will deliver 70-degree temperature within the glasshouse. That's an example of direct use. The glasshouse to its left, as you can see, is drilling shallower and it's only accessing 40 degrees. That will provide baseload heat, but it's not quite enough to reach that optimal temperature of 70 degrees. Therefore, that 40 degrees will be the source temperature that feeds into a heat pump, and that heat pump then is able to deliver or convert that 40 degrees into 70 degrees. The other important term that I think is worth introducing briefly is the distinction between an open loop and a closed loop system. On the left there is an example of a well open loop. It's pretty similar to say the water bore you might have at your home. You drill into the ground, you extract from the aquifer, and then you return that water back into the aquifer. There are installations where that return might just be soaking through the ground, but in this example here, there is another drill hole and the water is returning back into the aquifer. So that's an open process, taking the water and delivering the water back into the ground. The heat exchanger in this case as this can be used for direct use or indirect use. The heat exchanger sits within the building. Whereas if you look at the closed loop system to the right there, this is a little bit different where the heat exchange system is sitting within the ground. Those are closed loops of piping sitting within the ground, and it's almost using the ground like a thermal battery. Within those pipes is a liquid, maybe a brine solution that just circulates, and it circulates that warm water or hot water throughout the system. There are pluses and minuses between these systems. The reason that you'll use one in location and not another is determined by a lot of different factors. It could be your access to groundwater, activity happening with your neighbours, etc. So there can be pluses and minuses for both, but I'm not going to make a sweeping statement about that because it's always going to be determined by a professional on a case-by-case basis. So what we have here is a diagram that we use quite often to illustrate the potential uses of geoheat. This is specifically about the agricultural sector and comes from IRENA. So as you can see, there's a barometer there with temperatures all the way up to 160 degrees. The little icons in the blue shaded areas there show the different types of industry that can use geothermal heat directly. What we have done, just as a little modification to this diagram, is to add the lines there with GSHP. That stands for ground source heat pump. And what it's illustrating is that you can use these ground temperatures that are present, and at the moment, a conventional ground source heat pump will comfortably deliver 70 degrees. So you can see all the different types of industrial applications that supports. And then the next point is that with technology advancements at the moment, which we will cover later, current technology of very high temperature heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, are able to deliver 120, approaching 160 degrees. The higher the source temperature, ground source temperature that you can feed into that very high temperature heat pump, the more efficient its operation will be. So why consider geoheat? Well, unlike other renewables, a major benefit is that it's not weather dependent. It sustainably generates heat 24/7. I mentioned the work with the covered crop growers before. The fact that heat generates 24/7 is a major attraction for them because they really need that heating at nighttime. And then another point here is that unlike biofuels and hydrogen, geoheat does not need to be transported, stored on site. It's not subject to supply constraints and fluctuating costs. So there's a real appeal of energy security and localized energy security if you can pursue a geoheat installation. It's compatible with electrification and can reduce the need to upgrade or invest in electrical infrastructure. I'm hoping that Yale in his slides will actually cover this as well. But when you are looking to electrify, you may consider going for an air source heat pump. But one of the considerations with that is that you're going to be hitting peak electrical load, and you need to be able to consider whether there is enough infrastructure capacity within your neighborhood or in the region. So when you consider a ground source heat pump, because it is much more efficient, often your peak loads are say half of what it might have been with an air source heat pump. And so one of the big wins with some of these projects is not needing the requirement to invest in electrical substations, for example. In some projects, that could be a quick capex savings of $1 million on a project. It's really important that GeoHeat is you're able to see that there is these sort of holistic advantages from considering it. So I've just sort of sold you GeoHeat, but I'll also add that it always has to be site specific. It's really hard to talk about generalizations when it comes to GeoHeat. You need to be sitting above a suitable resource. That doesn't mean you need to be sitting necessarily above hot temperatures. We're going to show you what you can do with ambient temperatures very successfully. But it does also mean that you need to be sitting above really good access to groundwater. And if you've got that combination of good groundwater and geothermal heat, that's a great win. And if you might want to take a guess, one of the regions that we think has the combination of both of those, of course, that is the Tauranga geothermal system. Last slide for me before I hand over. So it's one of the interesting things about New Zealand is that we are world leaders in geothermal electricity generation, but we have very small amount of geoheat installations. And geoheat installations, direct or indirect use, as a global trend, is just really accelerating. And this is the point of this slide here. So to get an indication of where massive amounts of investment are going in, I'm going to direct you to the sort of the teal blue that is Iceland. So Iceland, like New Zealand, has surface features, even more geothermal electricity generation. So geothermal heating projects is not unexpected there, but you can see that it's a flat line of investment. What's really interesting is below Iceland in the darker blue from 2012 is you see the Netherlands, and that's a massive escalation in investment in geothermal heat. We're going to show you examples of glass houses where they are choosing to drill 2.5 kilometres to access temperatures which are available at a few hundred metres in Tauranga. So huge investment trend in Europe. The other main country other than the Netherlands to point out is Germany. But just collectively, as everybody transitions away from gas and coal and district heating schemes, it's forecast to be 7.4 billion spent on geothermal heating by 2030.
So yeah, my name's Yael Carton. I'm the director here at GeoExchange New Zealand, and I'm going to start going through actually the mapping and the work that we did for this project. So the first map we've got here is we've looked at 150 metres below sea level. The reason we picked this is that's where the majority of the boreholes are at depth in terms of the numbers. It's also a really kind of typical and kind of relatively economical depth for drilling to. So probably the main things we see here is when we look at that temperature at that depth, we can see the red dots there down to the south, up near the mount, and then there's some there through the sort of CBD area, which is the scale doesn't quite allow that perfectly. But you can see that at a depth of 150 metres, we're already getting temperatures over 40 degrees. And then obviously, and then up to the north is obviously the opposite in a way, in that we're only around the 20 to 25 degrees. However, when we think of that from a geoheat perspective, that's still a geothermally influenced section. We'd otherwise expect it to be around the 15 to 18 degrees if there wasn't a geothermal influence in those areas. So on this next slide, what we've tried to do is now we're showing actually where 30 degrees occurs at what depth across the site. As you would expect, again, down to the south, down around the mount, coming back through the CBD area, we've got our shallower steps, and it's about between 15 and 75 metres is those orange marks that you see. So we are seeing that 30 degrees occurring, relatively quickly. The one sort of odd anomaly, which you probably notice up to the northwest, out to the west there, is actually above sea level. You see the red mark there. We're actually above sea level. Obviously, we're up in the hills in that area. And having 30 degrees, which again, that's the RMA value of where officially we're geothermal. Now we want to have a look at where does 50 degrees occur? At what sort of depth do we find it? Now, probably the main interesting thing from here and from a resource management perspective, and one of the real summaries and conclusions of our work is that we can't extrapolate data here as such. So when we're talking about where we're hitting 50 degrees, there's not a lot of data. So we've just got dot point from individual bores. It's not like a mapping exercise, if you like. So what you will see, and probably not a surprise, the only red dot we have here is at the mount, which is the Mount Hot Pools. And that's less than 150 meters deep. And then the orange dots are where we're within 250 meters. We start to hit that 50 degrees. And again, you can see it down to the south and in around that CBD sort of area again. Who do you prefer or who aren't as good with maps? Do you prefer tables to look at the data? We've basically got the same sort of data here. And what we've done is we've aligned this with those future development zones from the Smart Growth Strategy. So you can see the port there where we've got 30 degrees at around 125 meters deep, 50 degrees, closer to 500 meters deep. As you go further down, Eastern Centre and Ranguri, you can see we're getting 50 degrees, or 30 degrees, I should say, around the 75 metres, 50 degrees within 200 metres deep. Now, one of the really interesting things when we did this overlay of these development zones with the geothermal areas is that we've actually got some of the higher temperatures in and around areas like the port and the business parks that need the high, where you want the higher temperature for processing. So it's really quite convenient. Whether or not it was planned or not, I guess we'll never quite know. The other thing is where we have the cooler temperatures, it doesn't mean that we can't use geoheat as a system. Remember, we've got the ability to use heat pumps, we've got the ability to use ambient groundwater. So some of those other areas that actually, where we've got the cooler water, actually makes it really good also for both heating and cooling systems. Maps and sort of where the temperatures are in around the Tauranga geothermal system. So we'll go through a couple of case studies of direct use and indirect use systems. So the direct use system we're showing here is from the Netherlands, where people are possibly familiar with. They're doing a lot of work both with greenhouses, but also with the transition away from fossil fuel heating systems. The greenhouse you see there is like 160 hectares, which compared to the typical large system in New Zealand is around 10 hectares. But they're drilling down to sort of 2 kilometres deep to get the 70, 80 degrees that we get here in New Zealand at, within hundreds of metres in many applications. Another example here of, again, a large system is a repurposing, if you like, or pulling out the fossil fuels for a district heating scheme in Munich, where they're targeting 100% of their district heating from renewable energies, and geothermal is going to be a big part of that. So they're putting in a whole series of 6 deep wells, and they're looking at 2.5 kilometres deep to get a 60-degree reservoir, and then again 5 kilometres deep 5 kilometres to the south, we're looking at 150 degrees. So we're talking about, again, much deeper depths for getting the sort of temperatures that in Tauranga we get very, very shallow. And probably just of interest here as well is that we're also now looking at adding district cooling to the system. With obviously a changing climate, they're starting to get more and more people looking for cooling as part of the system as well. To access that, they'll look at the shallower temperatures. 2 really quick case studies there of direct use systems. One of the main findings from the work that we did with the Bay of Plenty and the TGS was that when you utilize the heat pump or indirect use systems, you get a lot more flexibility in your applications. There's a lot more things you can do with it. So that really neatly leads us into our indirect case studies. So the first one I'm going to show is actually one of our projects from Australia in Canberra. It's the Australian War Memorial. It's just been commissioned in the last couple of weeks, and we're in like November. So late October or so, it was commissioned 24. It's using that 18-degree ground temperature that they have in Canberra to provide heating and cooling. And it's approximately 4 megawatts of a ground loop capacity. And they're doing that through a closed loop system where we've got 216 vertical bores at 150 metres deep. They all connected into a central energy plant, and that's feeding multiple buildings around the site. They're looking at energy savings of about $1 million a year and 1,400 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. So some really significant savings there. Of projects from our partners in the UK. What we've got here is using groundwater in an open loop system around the 12-degree mark, and providing heating and cooling to like sort of small town centre style things. So multiple buildings all wrapped up into a central heating system, or central heating and cooling system. Sharing this one here with Vienna for a district scheme that they're using. The reason for this is that they've got 3 large heat pumps there, and it's, I guess, in a way, shows not everything is about geothermal as such in terms of using the ground. Here, they're actually using for 56,000 households, looking to use a purified wastewater. So it's basically like you probably hear the terms of sewer heat recovery or effluent reuse sort of stuff. It's basically using the heat that's within that system to provide the heating to the entire area. And you see some big numbers there, up to over 100 megawatts in the next few years. A really interesting one that we find from Slovenia for a greenhouse for tomatoes. So what they've done here is they had groundwater source of about 30 to 40 degrees and at like 1,500 meters deep. So again, comparing to say the Tauranga system, much deeper, not quite as hot. They need to deliver 65 to 85 degrees during the greenhouse at different times of year. And so they've been doing that originally. They would use that source at 30 to 40. They'd boost it with gas to get up to the 65 to 85. They've pulled that gas heater out now and installed a heat pump to do that with. They're now getting efficiencies of 5 to 6 or 5 to 600%, COP of 5 and 6, and their energy savings of 70% compared with the gas. But that, for that extra boost from 30 up to 60, 65 plus. And the payback for them was less than 1 year because it's obviously so efficient. And as a caveat to that as well, they didn't have to install the bore or anything else, of course, because that was already, all that infrastructure was already in place. It was purely about pulling out the gas heater, putting in the heat pump. Showing this as a bit of a summary table here. This came out of the reader work with EECA. And what it was is just to show the efficiency differences and the savings differences, probably the important one for most, on what happens when you get these higher temperature waters. So if you're running a greenhouse system, you're looking at an air source heat pump, you're going to have to design it to, in a lot of parts of New Zealand, to operate down around the 0 degree mark. And this is a nice data point too for some of the systems. So we've assumed here, or we've allowed here from, from systems that you're going to get an efficiency of about 2 or 200%. When you get groundwater from ambient at 15 degrees, which is the one with the X there, then we can start to see that our COP is now at 2.7 or 2.8, I guess I should say, with obviously the energy savings from that. And then when we end up with groundwater around the 30 degree mark, so now we're just at the minimum, if you like, of that RMA definition of geothermal. We've basically doubled our COP and our efficiency from before, which of course means that we've halved our energy costs. And of course, as you get higher into more direct use, then those savings can become even greater. When we talk about heat pumps, there's always a lot of questions about what sort of temperatures can we get to. Most of your standard heat pumps are around the 60 degree marks, thereabouts. That's a function of the refrigerant that they use. Some of the newer heat pumps using CO2 and other things can get up around the 80 to 90 degrees. One of the really interesting things in the space at the moment is, and EECA actually calling these very high temperature heat pumps, but it's basically industrial scale, industrial size heat pumps that can produce steam. And looking at temperatures up to 160 degrees. That's with current technology in accordance with the European Heat Pump Association, and we have been seeing prototypes around 180 and even 200 in the next couple of years. So this really starts to open up the benefits of industrial heat from heat pumps, and then when you can start that heating process with a geothermally enhanced aquifer, then you've got even greater benefits than if that was an ambient groundwater situation. And in a way, just to show that it's not just us sort of stating this, EECA have just released, it's out at the moment, but it'll be closed in the next few weeks. So by sort of early December 24, a technology demonstration fund for these very high temperature heat pumps. So that is available, and in a way demonstrating that EECA and the government are also seeing this as a technology they want to see in action. Examples now, just of high temp heat pumps in action, or very high temp heat pumps in action, I guess. And a lot of them will use things like waste heat. So it's not all about geothermal with these. The important thing is the technology application to show that it works. The source itself arguably doesn't matter so much. Obviously having geothermal there is a real bonus. So this is looking at using 90 degree waste heat from their process. They're able to provide over 110 degrees to their drying system. And at around 80% reductions in CO2 and emissions. So some really obviously very significant savings there. And when we talk about that, a big part of that is that COP, that energy efficiency of 500% efficient. The next example we're going to show is now from Japan, where they're, again, replacing gas in manufacturing process. And this has been going since 2012. And they're using a heat source of 55 degrees. So they're doing 130 degrees into their dryers, for 125 degrees hot air into their dryer. Energy and savings are around the 65% mark at a COP of 3. So again, some really good savings. You think an electric boiler is a COP of 1, so 3 times more efficient than an electric boiler. Probably my favorite part of this is that because they're using now a dry air instead of using steam, which obviously can have a water content, they've reduced their drying time by several days. So from a production process, obviously significant benefits in that respect. A local example here from the work we did for the RETA. Here's what we looked at: a high temperature heat pump providing 120 degree steam, using 45 to sort of 55 degree geothermally enhanced waters from a depth of 300 meters. What we demonstrated by doing this, we could eliminate 1,500 tonnes of carbon emissions annually from that system, and the OPEX was actually similar to the existing gas costs. Now, compared to electric boiler, which would be the standard replacement in this sort of thing, we've got an energy usage of 64% reduction. Now, that's just both annually, but it's also means from the peak period, because often these systems are often operating in 100% capacity or near full capacity, all of the 24/7 operation. So while there was a initial investment of $4 to $5 million, looking at paybacks, better than 5 years on this.
You've just seen a number of really inspiring case studies. And you would have heard Yale mention quite often the term of a district energy scheme or district facility. And maybe sitting there thinking, well, what does this mean? Who invests in this, and who owns this? Essentially, there are very many different models around ownership, but I'll cover a few here. Um, a, One example, it could be a community-owned not-for-profit or a cooperative business model. This model guarantees outcomes for the benefactors of the system. An example or application I can see this really suiting is Papakāinga developments within New Zealand. We saw the example of the district schemes within Munich. A lot of those have public ownership. They're public-owned utilities servicing the city. So public ownership is another example. The benefit, from my perspective, around public ownership is that often a public-owned utility is the first opportunity to have a technology demonstration. Of course, it could be a PPE, so some type of hybrid of a public and private model. Or in the end, it could be a private-owned utility. So that might be a thermal utility or heat utility provider. So an organization which comes in and installs the infrastructure and gives those connecting a heat contract for 10, 20, 30 years. The systems may last or exist for upwards of nearly 100 years. So that's one example, but it could just be privately owned. Another example here that would suit the New Zealand context is iwi ownership. How it might work, this little schematic is just really nice in that there is there is harmony here of different renewables all working together. And underneath you can see the red and blue lines of geothermal. Blue is transporting cooling, red is transporting heat. Now each of those different operators, they could use, there's quite a bit of flexibility in how they use the resource which is available at their back door. They might like to just use the heat directly and take baseload heating energy. They might like to take that heat and feed it into a high temperature heat pump to deliver the high temperatures that they need. There might be remaining peak loads left, so they have perhaps remaining gas or another future fuel to hit those peak temperatures as needed. But that's just sort of an example of what a district scheme might look like. I will say that a district scheme, the benefits really are is savings. These systems are capital intensive, and that's very often the barrier to uptake. But you can get around that if you've got a private utility looking to invest. And just even from a perspective of if you're sitting there thinking, hey, this is a really good option for me. I'm in an industrial area and I know that my neighbor has pretty similar energy demand to me. Think about having a conversation with them. A district scheme doesn't have to be massive. If you can co-invest, there's going to be more savings, more sharing, more innovation, more collaboration, more progress generally as a region. And I will just add that from a resource management perspective, if you look at that schematic, if every single one of those buildings was to individually draw to access GeoHeat, it's not the best way of managing the resource, or it just can be done better if you have a centralized system. So from a resource management perspective, we know that Bay Plenty Regional Council are very supportive of this concept. So with that in mind, the development of this table evolved through our report. So the locations listed there within Tauranga are places earmarked within the smart growth strategy for development. what we've been able to do is just bring all the information that we were looking at in the report, highlight the temperatures that are available, highlight the depths, highlight what we know about the groundwater access, and then be able to make some conclusions around the likelihood of having a district heating scheme. What you'll see there is that there's lots of ticks, there's no crosses, and that's actually mostly a reflection of the Tauranga resource. I can imagine that in a different, if we were to look at a different region and overlay their development areas, it's not going to have the same homogeneous look as this table does. So just again, another plug that we really have got a wonderful resource in the wider Tauranga region. So answering those questions that we posed at the beginning. So could the Western Bay Penny use this comparatively shallow, low temperature geothermal resource to its strategic advantage as the region develops? That's a capital yes there. So a resounding yes. We really think that it is an underutilized resource at the moment and has great potential for the region as it has to go on its decarbonisation journey and its energy transition journey to electrification as well. These are all really harmonious ideas that we're talking about here while promoting the role of geoheat in the region. And importantly, how can this be done sustainably? So we're going to direct to some action items here. Of course, when it comes to resource consenting, the Bay Penny Regional Council have got their system management plan out at the moment, and there were recommendations within our report as to what we see as the best approach to resource management with geoheat installations. But a really key item is that this isn't the end. We don't present this opportunity and everybody walk away and necessarily do their own thing. We need to continue to have the region strategically sit together and come up with a geoheat strategy for the region, because it is such an opportunity to support decarbonisation, to ensure energy security, regional energy security, and to contribute to that economic growth. But if we do that in a way which is extractive and not protecting the resource, we're no better off than we are at the moment. So that regional strategy needs to be strategic about how we approach this opportunity. We need to continue to investigate the feasibility of geoheat applications, just like the examples and case studies that we've just shown you. We need to understand the applicability for industry within the region. Carry on doing pools, especially community facility pools, but don't just heat the pool, heat the facilities that are there. And if you've got a gym and a daycare centre nearby, make sure that you're using that heat, not just for the pool, but for those facilities as well. Great opportunity with commercial and residential buildings. A lot of development is happening within the region, which would be applicable in this case. I've mentioned horticulture, cover crop industry, so motivated by this opportunity that they're funding research themselves. And really great opportunity, as I said, for housing developments. The fact that your heating and cooling demand can be 50% lower than an air source equivalent is great motivation to see these installations within residential developments. Specifically there, I believe that we can add information for those looking at Papakāinga development. Consenting, there is a Bay Penny Regional Council very much see the opportunity, and they are balancing that opportunity with sustaining the resource. As I've already said, that is the only way forward. It is paramount that the resource is managed effectively. And hopefully you're sitting here going, wow, I've just really learned a lot. So we know that not many people know about this opportunity with case studies overseas and even just the breadth and depth of the resource within Tauranga. So we've got to continue this public education effort to highlight the opportunities and the benefits. So I hope you found that a really useful presentation. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Our contact details are there on the screen. You've heard Yael and myself speak today. Hugh Williams, who is a hydrogeologist, is based in Europe, but an absolute guru and expert in his field, and would happily answer very specific hydrogeology questions, I don't doubt. Uh, Thank you very much. Ngā mihi.